Every morning my day starts the same way. The creak of floorboards under my feet, the smell of coffee, and the quiet rustle of calendar pages as I cross out another day. My house in Dinwiddie is old, like most of the houses in our town. 2 stories high with chipped paint on the facade and a creaky veranda. It has witnessed 65 years of my life. My name is Nella Hammond. I've been working at the local post office for 20 years, sorting the letters and packages that come into our little town. No, it's not the job I dreamed of when I was young, but it's kept me afloat since Earl, my husband, died. He passed away 5 years ago. A heart attack took him so quickly that I didn't even have time to say goodbye. That Wednesday morning, I got up at 6 as usual, made coffee and oatmeal, and turned on the radio. The announcer's voice mumbled something about fuel prices going up. News like that used to make me anxious, but now I've learned to ignore what I can't change. "Another day, Earl," I said, looking at the picture of my husband on the kitchen table. It showed him smiling as he showed off his catch, a huge trout he'd caught on Lake Chesco. It was one of his few weaknesses, fishing. Otherwise, Earl was frugal to the point of miserliness. "Every penny counts, Nella," he often said, scrutinizing the electric bill or refusing a new shirt because the old one was still quite wearable. Thanks to his frugality, we had a small savings. Nothing grandiose. $28,000 in a bank account and a house for which the mortgage was long paid off. It might seem like a small thing to many people, but to me it was a safety cushion in case of illness or other unforeseen circumstances. After finishing my coffee, I put on my postal worker's uniform shirt, a light blue one with an emblem on the pocket. 20 minutes later, I was standing at the sorting table in our small post office. "Good morning, Nella." Doris, the only coworker with whom we shared the morning shift, greeted me. Doris was 10 years younger than me, but she was already complaining of arthritis in her fingers. "How are you doing today?" "The usual," I replied, putting on my work gloves. "Coffee, radio, and talking to my husband's picture. I guess I'm becoming that crazy old lady the kids talk about." Doris laughed. "You're far from crazy, just peculiar." I smiled. I liked that no one in our little group took life too seriously. We cracked jokes while sorting through emails, and the day went by faster. "Keith called," Doris said, handing me a stack of envelopes. "He asked when you were finishing today." I sighed. Keith, my only son, was a complicated man. At 39, he still hadn't learned to stand on his own 2 feet. As a child, he was a sweet boy with dimples in his cheeks and blonde hair like Earl's. He often sat on the porch waiting for his father to return from work, and was the first to run to meet him. But adolescence changed everything. Keith started hanging out with disadvantaged kids, skipping school, and at 16 he was caught shoplifting. Earl was hard on him. "A guy's got to take responsibility for his actions," he said. But I always defended my son, finding excuses for his behavior. Maybe that was my mistake. When Keith turned 18, he dropped out of school and got a job at a machine shop. He stayed there for 3 months, then there was construction, a gas station, a delivery service. He never lasted long anywhere. And then the loan started. At first it was small amounts. "Mom, I need $50 before payday." Or, "I'll pay you back next month, I promise." But he never paid it back, and the amounts got bigger and bigger. "What did he want this time?" I asked Doris, even though I already knew the answer. "He didn't say," she shrugged, but her voice was tense. It meant Keith was in trouble again. I continued sorting, trying not to think about my upcoming conversation with my son. Over the years I'd worked at the post office, I'd learned to identify the contents of envelopes by their appearance. Thick, formal envelopes usually contained bills or notices. Thin, colorful envelopes contained advertisements, and handwritten letters were becoming rare in this digital age. At noon, I took a break and walked into a small cafe across from the post office. Sitting at the window with a cup of tea, I saw Keith's tattered sedan pull into the parking lot. He turned off the engine but didn't get out of the car right away. I saw him talking on the phone, gesticulating vigorously. His face expressed concern. Finally, he got out of the car and headed towards the cafe. I noticed that his jeans looked new, and a watch I hadn't seen before glistened on his wrist. I wondered where he'd gotten the money for those purchases. "Hi, Mom," Keith said, sitting down across from me. He tried to smile, but it was a strained smile. how are you doing? Fine, I said, studying his face. Despite his attempts to look carefree, there was tension in his eyes. And you? I'm fine, he answered too quickly. Work is going well. Verna is happy with her new position at the insurance company, and Pearl, you should see her drawings. She's growing up to be a real artist. I smiled at the mention of my granddaughter. Pearl, Keith and Verna's 6-year-old daughter, was the light in my life. Unlike her father, she was responsible beyond her years and always told the truth, even when it was inconvenient. I'm glad to hear it, I said. I haven't seen Pearl in a long time. Why don't you bring her over this weekend? Sure. Keith nodded, but I could see him tapping his fingers nervously on the table. Look, Mom, I've got a little problem. Here it is. I knew the conversation would come to this. What is it this time? I asked, trying to keep my voice sounding neutral. I need to pay for car repairs, he said, avoiding my gaze. The transmission's broken, and I can't work without a car. It's $2,000, but I only have $800 right now. I'll pay it all back next month, I promise. I looked at my son, remembering all his previous promises. How many times had he said the same thing? Dozens? Hundreds? And how many times had he actually returned the money? None. Keith, I began, the last time you asked me for money, it was for temporary difficulties. And the last time, too. I've given you almost $3,000 in the last 6 months. Where did it go? His face tensed up. I told you, car loan, house bills, Pearl's school. Life is expensive, Mom. Not everyone can be as frugal as Dad. The mention of Earl prickled me. Keith knew it was a sensitive subject. Your father was frugal because he was thinking about the future, I said. Our future, and yours too. Yeah, and that's why we never went anywhere, wore the same clothes for years, and lived on the edge of poverty even though we had money, Keith snapped. What's the point of saving if you don't live life to the fullest? It was an old argument. Keith always thought that Earl and I were too frugal, that we were putting life on hold. He didn't realize that it was because of that frugality that I now had a house and a bank account while he, with his live for today philosophy, was constantly in debt. I can't give you $1,200, Keith, I said firmly. I have heating bills myself, and I need to replace the water heater. This was only partially true. The water heater was really broken, but I could afford to replace it and help my son. I was tired of being his ATM, however. Keith's face darkened. Seriously, Mom? You're turning down your own son? It's not like I'm asking for nothing. It's for work. Without a car, I can't go to my clients. What about Verna? Can't she help? I asked. She has her entire paycheck going to her education loan and her mother is in a nursing home, Keith answered quickly. Too fast. I knew Verna's mother lived with her sister in Ohio and was quite healthy. Look, Keith, I sighed. I can give you $500. No more than that. And this time I really expect a refund. His face expressed a mixture of disappointment and relief. Okay, thanks. Something's better than nothing. I'll take the rest on credit. Another loan, I thought, but kept silent. Keith was an adult and made his own decisions, even if those decisions were bad. After lunch, Keith left, and I went back to the post office feeling heavy on my heart. I loved my son, but his constant financial problems were wearing me out. Sometimes I wondered what Earl would have said when he saw what our boy had become. He'd probably be disappointed in both of us, Keith for being irresponsible, and me for letting him sit on my neck. The rest of the day went by in the usual routine. I sorted letters, answered visitors' questions, and filled out forms. This work didn't require much mental effort, which allowed me to immerse myself in my thoughts. I thought about Keith, about Pearl, about the money I was saving for a rainy day. I'd always thought that this money would be useful in my old age, when I couldn't work anymore. But what if Keith keeps asking for more and more? What would be left for me? At 5 o'clock, I finished my shift and went outside. The fall air was cool, and the leaves on the trees were beginning to yellow. I walked home slowly, enjoying the silence of Dinwiddie's small streets. This town had never changed. The same stores, the same faces, the same rhythm of life. Everyone knew each other here, and news spread faster than a forest fire. At home, I made myself a simple dinner of chicken soup and buttered toast. I turned on the TV to fill the silence, but I didn't really listen to the program. My thoughts were still revolving around the conversation with Keith. An hour later, the phone rang. It was Verna, my sister-in-law. Unlike Keith, she always seemed more responsible, although lately I'd noticed that she often supported him in his requests for money. "Hi, Nella," she said in her soft voice. "How are you?" "Fine, thank you," I replied. "And how are you?" "Fine." A pause followed. "Listen, Keith said he talked to you today." I knew where this was going. "Yeah, he asked me for money to fix his car. I gave him 500. He told me," Verna said. "Look, I know we come to you for help a lot, and I appreciate your support, but the situation is really difficult. Keith is worried about losing his job without a car." "What about your paycheck?" I asked him straight out. "You work for an insurance company, don't you?" There was a pause. "Yes, but we have a lot of expenses. Pearl needs new winter boots, plus the house payment." I listened to her excuses, thinking about how often these conversations had happened over the years. There was always some urgent need, always some crisis that could only be solved with my money. "Verna," I interrupted her. "I've already told Keith I can only give him 500, that's all." "But Nella," she said, a pleading note in her voice, "you know you have savings. This is a family crisis, as if that justified everything." "I have savings for my old age," I said firmly. "I'm not going to be a burden to you when I can't work anymore, and that's why I can't give money away." "But we're a family," Verna exclaimed. "Don't you want to help your son?" "I am helping," I replied. $500 is help. The rest he has to decide for himself." The conversation ended on a tense note. Verna said they'd bring Pearl back over the weekend and hung up. I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, feeling a mixture of guilt and irritation. Maybe I really had been too harsh? After all, Keith was my only child. But another part of me, the part that remembered all of Earl's lessons about financial responsibility, said I'd done the right thing. Keith would never learn to stand on his own 2 feet if I kept saving him. Before I went to bed, I checked my bank account online. $28,450. Not a lot for someone my age, but enough to feel some security. I thought about how hard Earl and I had worked to save that money, how we denied ourselves many things to provide for the future. I turned off the computer and lay in bed, looking up at the ceiling. The house was quiet, only the old clock in the living room counting down the seconds. I thought about Keith, about his constant financial problems, about how he changed when it came to money. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was afraid that one day he might do something desperate to get what he thought he was owed. With these thoughts, I fell asleep, not realizing that my fears would prove prophetic. 2 weeks had passed since our conversation with Keith in the cafe. During that time, he had come twice with Verna and Pearl, which was unusual. They had not come to see me more than once a month before. I noticed a change in their behavior. Keith became especially attentive. He took an interest in my health, offered to help around the house, even fixed a leaky faucet in the kitchen that I was about to call a plumber to fix. Verna brought home baked goods and asked at length about my future plans. "Have you thought about moving to a smaller apartment?" she asked me last Sunday while helping me wash the dishes after dinner. "This big house requires so much maintenance, and you're not young anymore." "I like my house," I said, wiping my plate. "It's where I've spent my whole life with Earl. Besides, what am I going to do with all my stuff?" "You could sell it or give it away," Verna shrugged. "By the way, Keith has a friend in real estate. He says it's a good time to sell." I looked at my sister-in-law carefully. There was an insistence in her voice that made me wary. "I'm not going to sell the house, Verna," I said firmly. "At least as long as I can take care of it." She quickly changed the subject, but the conversation got me thinking. Why were they suddenly so interested in my house? And why did they start coming more often? The answer came the next day when Keith called me at work. Mom, listen, I have a little problem," he began after the usual greetings. "You remember Trevor from school? His brother works at the bank, and he told me about a lucrative investment. Stock in some tech company that's about to go public. If you invest now, you can triple it in a month." I felt the muscles in my neck tense up. I'd seen enough letters from scam victims in my years at the post office to know that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't. How much do you have to put up? I asked, already knowing the answer. At least 5,000, Keith said. But I was thinking 10. Can you imagine in a month's time it would be 30,000? We could split the profit. Where are you going to get 10,000? I asked, though the answer was obvious. There was a pause. Well, I was thinking, maybe you could borrow it. You have savings and this is a real chance to increase them. There you go. I mentally commended myself for never telling Keith the exact amount in my account. He obviously thought I had a lot more money than I did. Keith, I'm not going to invest in any dubious schemes, I said. And neither should you. It's not a dubious scheme, he objected. Trevor's brother is a professional. He knows what he's doing. It's insider information, Mom. Opportunities like this don't happen every day. That's exactly why I'm worried, I replied. Insider trading is illegal, Keith. I don't want anything to do with it. He sighed. You're always like this, afraid to take risks and miss opportunities. That's why you and Dad have lived your whole lives in this backwater instead of… Instead of what? I interrupted him. Instead of investing in dubious ventures and being penniless? Earl was right about saving, and you know it. There was silence on the other end of the line. When Keith spoke again, his voice sounded more subdued. All right, forget it. I just wanted to help us both make some money. But since you don't want to, you don't have to. The conversation ended shortly thereafter, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. This wasn't Keith's first questionable investment idea. Over the past few years, he'd suggested I invest in cryptocurrencies, some kind of eco-friendly bag startup, and even opening a bakery, even though neither he nor Verna had any experience in baking. Each time I declined, and each time he accused me of being too conservative and afraid to take risks. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really was missing opportunities because of my caution. But then I remembered how Earl methodically put money away every month, how we ate simple meals and bought clothes on sale to ensure a peaceful old age. And I was starting to feel better. The next day, Keith called again, but this time his tone was completely different. Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday, he said. You were right about that investment. I talked to another acquaintance and he said it sounded suspicious. I was surprised by his apology. Keith didn't usually admit his mistakes. I'm glad you figured it out, I said gently. Yeah, he said quietly. Listen, I have a favor to ask of you. Verna has a doctor's appointment tomorrow and Pearl's got no one to leave her with. Could you keep an eye on her? It'll be about 2 hours tops. Sure, I agreed immediately. Despite the difficulties with Keith, I adored my granddaughter. Bring her, I'll be home all day. Thanks, Mom, he sounded relieved. Oh, and, I need to pick up some paperwork from the bank. Could you give me your card? I need to prove I'm your son, and then they'll show me the inheritance information from Uncle Roy. I frowned. Uncle Roy, Earl's brother, died over 10 years ago and left no inheritance. What inheritance are you talking about, Keith? Uncle Roy gave it all to his church. No, it turns out there was some stock in your name, Keith said quickly. The bank called me and said I had to come in with proof of parentage. I could feel the anxiety building inside me. Keith was obviously lying, but why? If the bank wants to contact me about the inheritance, they'll send a letter or call me directly, I said. And they don't need my card to prove your parentage. A birth certificate will suffice. But Mom, they said. Keith, I interrupted him, I'm not giving you my bank card. If there's any inheritance, I'll go to the bank and sort it out myself. There was a long pause. Okay, he finally said with obvious irritation. I was just trying to help, but if you don't trust me… It's not about trust, I countered, though that was the point. It's just something you have to do in person. Whatever you say, Keith said coldly. I'll bring Pearl back tomorrow anyway. After that conversation, I could not shake the feeling of uneasiness. Why did Keith need my bank card? And what was this sudden story about an inheritance from Uncle Roy? That evening, I took my card out of my wallet and examined it carefully. It was old, with frayed edges and numbers that were starting to wear off. I rarely used it, preferring to pay with cash. Maybe I should have ordered a new one. Or, given Keith's strange behavior, changed the PIN code. I called the bank, and after a short conversation with the operator, I changed the code. Now, instead of Keith's birth date, yes, I was that predictable. The code was the date Earl and I were married. That brought some relief, but the anxiety wasn't completely gone. The next morning, I woke up early. The day promised to be warm, one of those golden fall days when the sun is still warm, but the air is already full of freshness. I opened the windows to air out the house and began to prepare for Pearl's arrival. The girl loved to draw, so I pulled out the sketchbook and colored pencils I kept especially for her. I also baked chocolate chip cookies, her favorite. The smell of vanilla and chocolate filled the kitchen, reminding me of when Kit was little, and I used to bake the same cookies for him. The doorbell rang at 11 sharp. Keith stood on the doorstep, holding Pearl's hand. The girl smiled when she saw me, and I felt a warmth spill into my chest. She was as fair-haired as Kit had been as a child, but her eyes were like Verna's dark brown and attentive. "Grandmother!" she exclaimed, hugging me. "I missed you so much." "Me too, sweetie," I replied, kissing her on the top of her head. "Come on in, I baked your favorite cookies." Pearl ran happily into the kitchen, and I turned to Keith. "What time will you be back?" "About 1 o'clock, he said, looking back at the car where Verna was waiting. "The doctor's appointment is at 11:30, but there's always a line." "Okay, we'll be here," I nodded. "Pearl will be all right." Keith hesitated, as if he wanted to say something, but then he just nodded and headed for the car. I watched them drive away, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I got back to the kitchen, I saw that Pearl was already sitting at the table eating cookies. Yummy," she said with her mouth full. "Mommy never bakes cookies. She says she doesn't have time." Well, I have plenty of time," I smiled, sitting down next to her. "How's school going?" "Good." Pearl sipped her cookies with milk. "I've learned to write all the letters, even G and S. They're the hardest." "That's great," I said. "What else is interesting?" Pearl talked about her teacher, about her friends, about the new book they were reading in class. She talked nonstop, jumping from one topic to another, as children usually do. I listened, enjoying her enthusiasm and innocence. After cookies, we moved to the living room where Pearl began to draw. She was concentrating on drawing lines, sticking out the tip of her tongue with eagerness, just like Keith had done when he was her age. "That's you, Grandma," she said, showing the drawing. It showed a figure with gray hair, wearing the blue uniform of a postal worker. "And that's me. We're together." "It's very beautiful," I complimented. "You're a real artist." Pearl brightened at the compliment and went back to painting. I sat beside her, watching her and thinking how fast time was passing. It seemed like only yesterday I was sitting with little Keith like this, and now he had a daughter of his own. "Grandmother," Pearl said suddenly, not looking away from her drawing, "why does Daddy want to take your money?" I froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Pearl looked up at me. "He told Mommy that you're old and don't know how to spend money properly, that he'd know better how to use it." I felt a chill go through me. Keith had discussed my finances with Verna in front of the baby? When had Daddy said that? I asked, trying to speak calmly. "Last night," Pearl answered, returning to her drawing. "They thought I was asleep, but I went to get a drink of water and I heard it. Daddy said if you didn't give him the map, he'd find another way." My heart beat faster. So yesterday's request for the map wasn't a coincidence. Keith was really planning to get access to my money. "What else did Dad say?" I asked cautiously. Pearl shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know, I went to bed. But they often talk about money when they think I can't hear. Daddy always says he needs more." I looked at my granddaughter, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. She was so innocent and didn't understand the meaning of her words. But to me, they sounded like a wake-up call. "Pearl," I said, stroking her head, "sometimes adults say things that aren't quite right. It's my money, and I alone decide how to spend it. Do you understand?" She nodded. "Of course I do. Like my pencils, I decide which ones I want to draw with." "That's right," I smiled, admiring the child's logic. We spent the rest of the time drawing and reading books. Pearl didn't mention money again, and I didn't ask, not wanting to drag the child into adult problems. But I couldn't get her words out of my head. When the doorbell rang at 2:30, I knew for certain that Keith was up to something, and I had to be ready. "How did it go?" Keith asked as he entered the house. He looked tense, his eyes roaming the room as if he were searching for something. Fine, I replied. Pearl, as always, was a clever girl. How was the doctor's appointment? What? Oh, it was fine, he said absently. Nothing serious. Verna's waiting in the car. Pearl, pack up, we've got to go. Pearl reluctantly began to put her pencils away. Can I take the drawing with me? She asked, showing me a sheet of paper that showed us together. Sure, I said. And here, take some more cookies for Mom. I handed her the bag of cookies, and she ran happily to the door. I'll be right back, I just have to go to the bathroom, Keith said, heading into the back of the house. The restroom is being renovated, I lied quickly. Use the one in the guest room. Keith froze for a moment, then nodded and turned the other way. I knew he wanted to check my bedroom where my purse and wallet were on the dresser. While he was in the bathroom, I walked Pearl to the car. Verna was sitting in the passenger seat talking on the phone. She waved at me but didn't come out to say hello. When I got back to the house, I saw Keith coming down the stairs. Sorry for the delay, he said with a strained smile. We'll be going. Keith, I stopped him. What's going on? What are you talking about? His face became tense. You know what I mean. These constant requests for money, questions about my card, trying to access my savings. Mom, you're being paranoid, he interrupted me. I'm just trying to help. You're not getting any younger, and you might need support. I don't need that kind of support, I said firmly. And I don't want you discussing my finances with Verna, especially in front of Pearl. His face changed. I could see the irritation in it now. She blabbed to you? Damn, that kid can't keep her mouth shut. She didn't spill anything, I countered. She just repeated what she heard, and I'm concerned about what she heard. Keith took a step toward the exit. Verna and I were just discussing the family finances. Nothing out of the ordinary. My finances are not your family finances, I said, and I want you to respect that. He shrugged. Whatever you say, but when you need help, don't come to me. With those words, he walked out, leaving me standing in the hallway with a heavy heart. I watched their car pull away and thought about how we'd gotten to this point. When did my son turn into a man who only sees me as a source of money? I walked to the kitchen and sat at the table looking at the drawings Pearl had left behind. One of them showed her family, Keith, Verna, and herself, all smiling and holding hands. So happy and serene their family looked in the eyes of a child. If only reality matched that picture. A phone call snapped me out of my musings. It was Doris from the post office. Nella, you won't believe who came by today, she said without preamble. Your son. Asked when your next shift was and what time you usually eat lunch. I felt a chill run down my spine. And what did you tell him? That I couldn't divulge employee schedules, Doris replied. He looked disappointed. He said he wanted to surprise you. Thank you, Doris, I said. You did the right thing. After the conversation, I sat staring out the window for a long time. Why would Keith want to know my schedule? And what was this surprise he was planning? I stood up and checked my bag. My wallet was in place, my bank card too. But something told me this wasn't over. Keith was clearly up to something, and his visit to the post office was part of that plan. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, something I had never done before during daylight hours. I even called the bank again to make sure my account was okay. In the evening, the phone rang. It was Keith. Mom, he said, and his voice sounded unusually soft. I wanted to apologize for today. You're right, I shouldn't have discussed your finances with Verna, especially in front of Pearl. I'm just worried about you, you know? I stayed silent, not knowing whether to believe this sudden remorse. Listen, he went on, I was wondering, would you mind watching Pearl tomorrow? Verna's got a doctor's appointment and I've got to work. It'll only be a couple hours tops. I hesitated. On the one hand, I was glad to spend time with my granddaughter. On the other hand, after today's discoveries, I wasn't sure I wanted to see Keith. Okay, I finally said. Bring her over like yesterday. Thanks, Mom. He sounded relieved. You're the best. And I'm sorry again about today. I didn't mean to upset you. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after the conversation. Something in Keith's voice, in his sudden apology, made me wary. He rarely apologized, preferring to deny his guilt or shift it onto others. Why was he suddenly so compliant now? And then it hit me. Tomorrow. He wanted to bring Pearl back tomorrow. After I refused to give him my card, after it was clear that I knew what he was up to, he still wanted access to my house. I remembered Pearl's words. Dad said that if you didn't give him the map, he'd find another way. What if that another way had to do with tomorrow's visit? The anxiety I'd felt all day intensified. Keith was planning something, and I had to be ready. But for what exactly? What could he possibly do? I went to the bedroom and pulled out my bag. The bank card was there, but now I wasn't sure that was enough. What if Keith was planning something else? What if he wanted to access my savings another way? I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts swirled around Keith, his strange behavior, and Pearl's words. What was he up to? And how could I protect myself? I spent a restless night with these thoughts, knowing that tomorrow I would face something I might not be prepared for. The morning was overcast. Gray clouds covered the sky, heralding rain. I woke up to the first rays of sunlight that struggled to break through the heavy clouds. My sleep was restless. I dreamed of Earl, trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the day ahead. Keith was supposed to bring Pearl back around 10 o'clock. What was he up to this time? My suspicions were growing stronger, especially after Doris's call yesterday. Why would Keith want to know my work schedule? And why was he so insistent on getting my bank card? Sighing heavily, I got out of bed. At my age, mornings didn't feel as invigorating as they used to. My joints ached and my back reminded me of itself with every movement. But I couldn't afford to succumb to old age, especially now that I felt I had to be alert. I made myself a simple breakfast, toast with jam and a cup of strong tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. It was starting to drizzle outside the window, droplets dripping down the glass in fanciful patterns. My thoughts went back to Keith. What had changed in my boy? When had he changed from that inquisitive child who picked rocks on the riverbank and brought me wildflowers to a man willing to cheat his own mother for money? Maybe I spoiled him too much, or maybe I wasn't strict enough. Earl always said I was indulging Keith, not letting him face the consequences of his actions. Maybe he was right. My gaze fell on a picture of Earl standing on the windowsill. It showed him at work in the garden, focused, shovel in hand, just as I'd always remembered him, hardworking, dependable, thorough. What would you do if you were me, Earl? I asked out loud, even though I knew there would be no answer. But deep down, I knew what he would say. Earl had no tolerance for dishonesty and had always believed that everyone should be responsible for their actions. Don't let anyone, not even your own son, step over you, he used to say. This thought gave me determination. I decided to prepare for Keith and Pearl's visit. I got flour, sugar, and eggs out of the pantry, everything I needed to make the pancakes that Pearl loved so much. Cooking always helped me to calm down and collect my thoughts. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Keith stood on the threshold, holding Pearl's hand. She was smiling, but she looked a little sleepy. "Hi, Mom," Keith said, kissing me on the cheek. His voice sounded strained, despite his attempt to sound casual. "Thanks for agreeing to babysit, Pearl." "It's always good to see my girl," I said, leaning toward my granddaughter. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" "Fine," Pearl replied quietly, clutching the tattered bunny, her favorite toy, to her chest. I took Hoppy so he wouldn't be bored at home. "Very good," I said as I let them into the house. "I have pancakes with maple syrup ready." Pearl's eyes lit up and she ran into the kitchen. Keith remained standing in the hallway, looking around with a strange expression on his face. "Looking for something?" I asked as casually as possible. "Huh?" "No, just—" He hesitated. "I just think I should paint these walls. They're looking a little faded." "They've been like that for 10 years, I said. "I don't think it's an urgent problem." Keith shrugged and looked at his watch. "I have to go. Verna's waiting in the car. She has an appointment at 10:30. We'll be back about an hour, maybe a little later." "Take your time," I said. "Pearl and I will find something to do." He nodded, looked around the hallway again, then said a quick goodbye to his daughter and left. I watched through the window as he got into the car and noticed that Verna was driving this time. Odd, Keith usually drove. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Pearl already eating pancakes. "Grandma, you make the most delicious pancakes in the world," she said with her mouth full. "Better than at the restaurant." "Thank you, sweetie," I smiled, sitting down next to her. "I'm glad you like it." We ate breakfast, and Pearl talked about school, about her teacher, Ms. Benson, about the new girl in her class who had recently moved in from out of town. I listened, enjoying her chatter, but part of my mind kept pondering Keith's strange behavior. After breakfast, Pearl decided to play with her dolls, which I kept in a special box for her visits. She settled down in the living room while I began to prepare lunch. Chicken noodle soup, another of my granddaughter's favorite dishes. As I chopped vegetables, I could hear Pearl talking to her dolls, making up stories for them. Her voice would go up and down, imitating different characters. It reminded me of the way Keith used to play as a child, with the same passion and imagination. "Grandmother," called Pearl, appearing in the kitchen with a doll in her hands. "Can I have some cookies for the tea party? It's Princess Lily's birthday today." "Sure." I pulled a packet of cookies out of the cupboard and poured a few onto a small plate. "Here, tell the princess congratulations from me." Pearl nodded gravely and went back into the living room. I could hear her continuing the game, now including the cookies. Her childlike directness made me smile, but at the same time, I felt anxious. What awaited this girl if her parents continued to behave like this? I finished making the soup and left it simmering slowly on the stove. Wiping my hands on a kitchen towel, I decided to check on Pearl. She was having a doll party in the living room. The dolls were sitting in a circle, each with a cookie in front of her. Pearl was just pouring imaginary tea from a toy teapot. "How's the birthday party going?" I asked, sitting down on the couch. "Great," Pearl replied. "Everyone came to congratulate Princess Lily, even Mr. Bumpy, although he's usually very busy." Mr. Bumpy was a teddy bear with a torn-off ear, which was also kept in a toy box. "That's very nice of him," I said seriously. Pearl nodded and continued her game. I watched her, thinking about what a smart and imaginative girl she was. So unlike her parents. "Grandma," Pearl said suddenly, not taking her eyes off her dolls, "my daddy is going to take your money tonight." I froze. Those words, spoken so casually, struck me like a bolt of lightning. "What did you say, Pearl?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Pearl looked up at me. There wasn't a shadow of guile in them, or of understanding the significance of her words, just childlike sincerity. "Daddy told Mommy he'd take your money tonight," she repeated. They thought I was asleep, but I heard. Daddy said he had a plan. My heart beat faster. That was it. That's why Keith was so insistent on bringing Pearl in today. "What else did Pa say?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as if we were discussing the weather. Pearl furrowed her brow, remembering. "He said he was going to make a copy of something. I can't remember the words, and that your money would solve their problems. A copy. Of the map, no doubt. But how was he going to do it, and when? What did Mom say?" I continued my inquiries. "She was afraid you'd find out," Pearl answered. "But Daddy said it would be all right because, she hesitated, apparently trying to remember the exact words. "Because you don't check your bill every day." It was true. I rarely logged into online banking, preferring the old-fashioned way of managing my finances, in person at a bank branch. "I see," I said, trying to hide my growing anxiety. "Do you know how Dad's going to get my money?" Pearl shook her head. "No. They stopped talking when they saw me. Daddy said I should go to bed because little girls need a lot of rest." I nodded, stroking her head. "Your daddy is right. Rest is very important for a growing body." Pearl went back to her game, clearly not realizing the importance of the information she had just imparted. And I sat there stunned. Keith was planning to steal my money, my own son. The rest of the morning passed like a blur. I played with Pearl, read books to her, but my thoughts were far away. I tried to figure out how Keith was going to carry out his plan. If he wanted to copy my map, he needed access to it. But the card was always with me in my wallet. And then it hit me. Yesterday, when he dropped Pearl off, he asked to use the restroom. I directed him to the guest room, but what if he did go into my bedroom? What if he had already copied the card data? At noon, Pearl and I had lunch of the soup I'd made. She ate with gusto, telling me about her friends at school. I tried to keep the conversation going, but my thoughts kept returning to Pearl's words about Keith's plans. After lunch, Pearl decided to draw. I gave her a sketchbook and colored pencils and sat next to her, pretending to read a magazine. In fact, I was thinking feverishly about the situation. If Keith had really copied my card details, he could try to withdraw the money tonight as soon as I left for work. Tomorrow I had a morning shift starting at 6 in the morning. I usually left the house at 5:30. That would give him plenty of time to withdraw the money before I noticed it was missing. My pondering was interrupted by the doorbell. It was about 1 o'clock. Keith had come back for Pearl. "Hi, Mom," he said as he entered the house. He looked more relaxed today, even pleased. "How'd it go?" "Great," I replied, watching him closely. "Pearl was a good girl as always." "Great," he patted his daughter on the head. "Come on, sweetheart, we have to go home." While Pearl gathered up her drawings, Keith looked around with a strange expression on his face. It was as if he were evaluating something. "It's a beautiful house," he said suddenly. "You know, Mom, you might want to think about getting insurance in case of fire or theft." "I have insurance," I said. "Your father always took care of things like that." "Yeah, Dad was very thoughtful," Keith nodded. "By the way, I noticed your credit card looks a little shabby. Maybe I should order a new one. Here it is." He's trying to find out if I replaced the card. "Maybe," I replied evasively. "I'll think about it." Pearl returned with the drawings, and Keith hurried to leave. "Thanks for your help, Mom," he said, standing in the doorway. "By the way, are you working tomorrow?" "Yes, I'm working the morning shift," I answered, watching his reaction carefully. A faint smile flashed across his face. "I see. Well, rest today. I'll see you the other day." They left, and I closed the door behind them, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Now I was sure. Keith was planning to use my card while I was at work. As soon as their car pulled away, I rushed to my bag. My wallet was in place, my bank card too. I examined it carefully. At first glance, everything looked normal, but something made me look closer. The card wasn't the way I usually put it in my wallet. I always had it face up, but now it was upside down. It could have been an accident. Maybe I'd flipped it over myself when I'd gotten the money out at the store. But my gut told me that Keith had gotten to my card after all. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the card in my hands. What do I do? Call the bank and block it? But what if I was wrong? What if Keith hadn't planned anything and this was all a figment of my imagination? No, I couldn't ignore what Pearl had said. Children don't lie about such things, especially if they don't understand their meaning. If Keith had said he was going to take my money tonight, then he was. I looked at my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The bank was open until 5. I had time to make arrangements. The decision came suddenly. I wouldn't just block the card. I would withdraw all the money from the account. If Keith tried to make a withdrawal, he would find there was nothing there. I quickly changed my clothes, grabbed my bag, and left the house. It had stopped raining, but the streets were wet and the air was fresh. I walked as fast as my old legs would allow, feeling a strange mixture of determination and sadness. The local bank branch was in the center of Dinwiddie, a 20-minute walk from my house. It was a small building with a blue sign and glass doors. Inside it smelled of paper and air-conditioned air. I went to a vacant window where a young woman with neatly bunched hair sat. "What can I do for you?" she asked with a professional smile. "I'd like to withdraw all the money from my account," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The woman raised her eyebrows slightly. "The entire balance? May I know the reason?" "Personal circumstances," I replied. "I need the cash." She nodded, though there was curiosity in her gaze. "Sure. Can I see your ID?" I pulled out my driver's license and handed it to her along with my bank card. She checked the documents, then started typing something on the computer. "Mrs. Hammond, you have $28,450 in your account. Are you sure you want to withdraw the entire amount in cash?" "Yes," I answered firmly. "But perhaps you could help me open a new account at another branch?" Now the woman looked intrigued. Of course we can arrange that. Is there a particular branch you're interested in? I wondered. I had to choose a branch that Keith wouldn't know about. The Chesterfield branch, I said. Chesterfield was a 30-minute drive from Dinwiddie. Keith rarely went there. Okay, she nodded. I'll prepare the necessary paperwork now. While she did the paperwork, I sat looking at the people going in and out of the bank. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. None of them were aware of the drama unfolding in my life, that my own son was planning to steal my life savings. The process took about an hour. First, I was given the entire amount in cash, wads of bills that barely fit in my bag. Then I filled out forms to open a new account at the Chesterfield branch. The bank employee patiently explained all the details, including the new card I would receive in a week. Your new account is already active, she said as she handed me the paperwork. You can deposit cash right now if you want. I nodded and handed her the money, keeping only $500 for current expenses. She counted the bills, then handed me a receipt for the deposit. Thank you for your help, I said, getting ready to leave. You're welcome, Mrs. Hammond, she said. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. As I left the bank, I felt strangely light. It was as if the weight I had been carrying for the past few days had finally fallen from my shoulders. My money was safe. Keith wouldn't be able to get to it. On the way home, I reflected on what had happened. My son, my only child, had planned to steal from me. It was painful to realize, but I could no longer close my eyes to the truth. Keith had changed, and not for the better. At home, I checked the time. It was almost 4 o'clock. If Keith planned to use my card tonight, he would soon discover there was no money in the account. What would he do? Would he call me with accusations? Show up in person? Or would he just pretend nothing had happened? I decided I'd be prepared for either option. I put the bank papers in a safe place, an old tin cookie box I kept on the top shelf of the pantry. Keith never looked in there. Then I made myself dinner, a simple salad and a piece of chicken left over from yesterday. I ate slowly, listening to every sound outside the window. Was Keith coming? Would the phone ring? But the evening passed quietly. No calls, no visits. I watched TV, tried to read a book, but my thoughts kept returning to Keith, to his plan, to Pearl's words. Before I went to bed, I checked the locks on the doors and windows one more time. It wasn't necessary. Dinwiddie was a safe town where theft was rare. But tonight I felt especially vulnerable. Lying in bed, I thought about tomorrow. What would it bring? Would Keith find out I'd gotten ahead of him? And if so, how would he react? With these thoughts, I fell asleep, not realizing that tomorrow would indeed bring dramatic events that would change our relationship with our son forever. That night, I slept restlessly, often waking up at the slightest noise. I dreamed of Earl standing in our bedroom doorway, shaking his head with a disappointed look. I told you, Nella, his look seemed to say. I warned you about Keith. I woke up at 4 in the morning with a heavy heart and couldn't go back to sleep. The morning was overcast, with a light drizzle outside the window. I made myself a cup of strong tea and sat by the window, watching Dinwiddie waking up. The neighbor across the street went out to get a newspaper. A woman with a dog walked past, hiding under a large umbrella. An ordinary morning in a small town. But for me, this day was not ordinary at all. I didn't go to work. I called Doris and told her I wasn't feeling well. She agreed to cover for me without question. Doris was a good friend. She knew when not to ask. The morning dragged on slowly. I cleaned the house, went through old photos, even baked an apple pie, anything to keep my hands busy and take my mind off Keith. But the anxiety wouldn't let go. What would he do when he discovered he couldn't withdraw money from my account? The answer came around 3 in the afternoon. The phone rang so sharply that I flinched. Keith's name popped up on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering it. Hello? Mom? It's me. Keith's voice sounded strained. Are you home? Yes, I answered. I didn't go to work today. I was a little sick. There was a pause. Nothing serious, I hope? No, just fatigue. At my age, you should get more rest. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in Keith's head, trying to digest the information that I wasn't at work as he expected. Mom, listen. He cleared his throat. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Did you, changed anything with your bank account lately? This is it, the moment of truth. I gripped the phone tighter. Actually, yes, I answered calmly. Yesterday I withdrew all the money and put it in a safe place. What? Why? His voice rose to a higher pitch. Why did you need to withdraw all the money? I heard about bank card fraud, I said, trying to keep my voice innocent. You know how concerned I am about security. I thought I'd better be safe. A long silence followed. I imagined Keith standing at an ATM somewhere, staring at a screen that said there were insufficient funds. Mom, this isn't very smart, he said finally. His voice sounded unnaturally calm, but I could hear the underlying tension. It's not safe to keep a large sum of money at home. You should return the money to the bank. Oh, I don't keep it at home, I said. I put it somewhere else, a very safe place. Where? He asked sharply then, apparently realizing his mistake, softened his tone. I mean, I'm worried about you. Where is your money now? It's safe, I replied firmly. Don't worry about it, Keith. I heard him sigh heavily. Mom, listen. I need to talk to you, in person. Can I come over now? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no to avoid confrontation, but the other part of me knew that the conversation was inevitable. Okay, I finally said. Come. 20 minutes later, Keith's car pulled up. I watched through the window as he got out, slammed the door harder than necessary, and walked briskly toward the house. His face was tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. Hi, Keith, I said, letting him inside. Would you like some tea? I just made an apple pie. No thanks. He walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. Mom, we need to have a serious talk. I sat down in the chair across from him with my hands folded in my lap. I'm listening. Keith ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he always did when he was nervous. Mom, I tried to withdraw money from your account today, using your card. His directness surprised me. I'd expected overtures, denials, but not such an open admission. I know, I replied calmly. He raised his head, looking at me in surprise. You know? Yes, Kit. Pearl told me about your plans. Daddy's going to take your money tonight, were her words. Keith's face changed. First shock, then anger, which was quickly replaced by something akin to shame. He paused. I wasn't going to steal from you, Mom. I just wanted to borrow some money. I'd pay you back as soon as I could. Borrow it without my permission? Using copied data from my card? My voice was quiet but firm. Keith, that's called stealing. No, he stepped forward. It's not. I'm your son. I have the right to... To what? I interrupted him. My money? The savings that your father and I have saved up all our lives. You have no right to it, Keith. He got up and started pacing the room. You don't understand. I'm in serious trouble. Debts, big debts. What kind of debts? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Keith stopped, looking out the window. I gamble a little, poker mostly. Sometimes I bet on sports. I usually win, but lately, he's been quiet. Lately, I've been unlucky. I felt a weight on my shoulders, a gambling addiction. That's why he was always in need of money. That's why his financial situation never improved despite a steady job. How much do you owe? I asked. He named an amount that made me wince. $20,000, almost all of my savings. Who do you owe that kind of money to, Keith? He sat down again with his head down. Some people, not the nicest people. They gave me until the end of the week to pay them back. If I don't pay, he swallowed. They threatened to hurt Verna and Pearl. I closed my eyes. The situation was worse than I thought. Keith wasn't just trying to steal my money for another bet. He was in danger, and so was his family. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I asked. Why didn't you tell me about your problems? I tried, he exclaimed. All those requests for money, but you never gave enough. And I couldn't tell you the truth. I was afraid you'd refuse to help if you knew you needed the money to pay your debts. So instead of talking to me honestly, you decided to steal? I sounded disappointed. I was desperate, Keith said quietly. These people aren't kidding, Mom. They could really hurt my family. I looked at my son and saw him as a scared boy who was in trouble and didn't know how to get out of it. But at the same time, I saw a grown man who had made a choice to steal from his own mother instead of honestly asking for help. Keith, I began, choosing my words carefully. I realize you're in a difficult position, but what you've done, what you tried to do, it's unforgivable. I know, he lowered his head even lower. I screwed up, big time, but Mom, I really don't know what to do. These people will find me wherever I am. Does Verna know about your debts? I asked. She knows I'm gambling, Keith admitted, but not about the amount of the debt. I told her I only owed a couple thousand. I sighed. Another lie in a long chain of deceit. Keith, I can't just give you $20,000, I said. Even if I wanted to, that's almost all of my savings. But you have a house, he said quickly. You could take out a loan against the house, or you could sell it and buy something smaller. You live alone anyway. Why do you need such a big house? I looked at him in surprise. Even now, after admitting to trying to steal it, he was still thinking about how he could get my money. No, Keith, I said firmly. I won't mortgage or sell the house to pay your debts. This house is all I have. It's my home, my memories, my life. But Mom, he was almost screaming. You don't understand. They're coming for me, for Verna, for Pearl. I understand, I answered calmly. And I want to help you, but not in the way you ask. Keith looked at me with a puzzled expression. What do you mean? I'll help you find a financial advisor, I said. Someone to help you make a plan to pay off your debts. I can give you $5,000, that's all I can afford, but on the condition that you seek professional help with your gambling addiction. His face contorted with anger. 5,000? Are you kidding me? That doesn't even come close to covering my debt. It could be a down payment, I said. Show your, creditors that you're serious about paying off your debt, and for the rest, you need to make a plan. I don't have time for plans. Keith jumped up from the couch. They gave me until Friday, 3 days. What am I supposed to do? Talk to them, I suggested. Explain the situation. Show them you have some of the money and a plan for the rest. You don't know these people. Keith grinned bitterly. They're not the negotiating type. I stood up and walked over to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Then maybe we should go to the police. If you and your family are being threatened? No, he interrupted sharply. No police. It would only make things worse. I stepped back, feeling my frustration growing. Then I don't know what else I can do, Keith. I offered what I could. $5,000 and help finding professional support. He looked at me with a look of disbelief that slowly turned to anger. You'd really do that? Would you leave your only son in the lurch? Your only child? I'm not leaving you in trouble, I said firmly. I'm offering to help, but not the kind of help you want. Keith shook his head, his face contorted with rage. You've always been like this. Stingy, like Dad. You both always held on to your precious money like it was more important than anything else. Money isn't more important than anything, I replied calmly. But respect, honesty, responsibility are more important, and you've shown that you have none of those qualities. He turned away, clenching his fists. I can't believe this. My own mother refuses to help me. I'm not refusing to help, I repeated. I'm refusing to give you all my savings without any guarantee that you won't spend it on another bet. Keith turned sharply toward me. Do you think I'm that irresponsible? That I'm going to take your money and go gambling, don't you? I asked. Isn't that how you got yourself into this situation? Constantly trying to get even, making bigger and bigger bets? He didn't answer, and I realized I'd hit the mark. Keith, my voice softened, I want you to understand. Even if I gave you all my money now, it wouldn't solve the problem. You'd pay off that debt, but what's to stop you from gambling again? Go back into debt? The problem isn't money, it's addiction. I don't have an addiction, he said stubbornly, but his voice sounded less sure. I just got a little carried away. Keith, you tried to steal money from your own mother, I reminded him gently. This isn't a little carried away. This is a serious problem. He sank back down onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. I don't know what to do, Mom. I really don't. He looked so lost in that moment, so much like the little boy I once comforted after a nightmare. My heart ached to just give him what he asked for, to solve his problems in one fell swoop. But reason said that would be wrong. It wouldn't help him in the long run. Let's do this, I suggested, sitting down next to him. Tomorrow we'll go to a financial advisor together. I know a good one. Benjamin Coulson, he helped me with investments after your father died. He might be able to come up with some solutions. And I'll give you 5,000, no more, provided you sign up for a gambling addiction treatment program. Keith lifted his head, his eyes red. What if it doesn't work? If they won't agree to wait? Then we'll think of other options, I said. But first, let's try this way. He was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, let's try it, but I'm not sure it will work. I'm not sure either, I admitted honestly. But we have to try. Keith stood up, looking exhausted. I've got to go. Verna will be worried. Will you tell her the truth? I asked. About the amount of the debt? He hesitated, then nodded. I'll have to. She deserves to know. I walked him to the door. Before he left, he turned to me. Mom, I'm sorry about the map. I shouldn't have done that. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed. But I'm glad you admit it. He nodded and walked to the car. I stood in the doorway, watching him drive away with a heavy heart. My son was in trouble, serious trouble, and I wasn't sure I could help him. Back in the house, I sat in my chair and stared at Earl's picture for a long time. What would he say now? Would he approve of my decision? Or would he insist on harsher measures? I didn't know the answers to those questions. I only knew that tomorrow would be a new day, and Keith and I had a tough road ahead of us. A road to rebuilding not only his finances, but our trust. The phone rang, snapping me out of my reverie. It was Verna. Nella? Her voice sounded strained. Keith had just gotten home. He told me about the debts and about what he tried to do with your card. Yes, I answered quietly. It's true. I didn't know, she said quickly. I swear I didn't know what he was planning to steal from you. I thought he was just going to ask for a loan. I remembered Pearl saying she'd heard my parents talking about my money. Verna obviously knew more than she was admitting, but now was not the time for accusations. What's important is what's happening now, I said. Keith's in trouble and he needs help. Real help, not just money. I know, her voice trembled. I'd long suspected he had a gambling problem, but I hadn't realized it was this serious. $20,000? I don't know how we're going to pay that much. We'll find a way, I said, surprised at my own confidence. We're going to see a financial advisor tomorrow. Maybe he can come up with a plan. Can I come with you? Verna asked. That goes for me too. Sure, I agreed. The more support Keith had, the better. After talking to Verna, I felt a little better. At least she seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation and was willing to help. But the problem remained. Keith was being threatened by people to whom he owed a large sum of money, and we only had 3 days to find a solution. I spent the rest of the evening thinking about my options. 5,000 I could give right away. They were part of the amount I'd withdrawn from the account and kept for operating expenses. But the other 15? I couldn't afford to give all of my savings even if I wanted to. It was money for my old age, for unexpected medical expenses. Maybe Benjamin would actually be able to offer some sort of solution, or maybe Keith could negotiate with his creditors for installment payments. Either way, we had a busy day ahead of us tomorrow. Before I went to bed, I checked the locks on the doors one more time. Not because I was afraid Keith would come back with bad intentions, but simply out of the insecurity that had lingered ever since I'd learned of his attempted theft. My life, which had seemed so predictable and measured, had suddenly turned into a drama full of danger and uncertainty. But one thing I knew for sure, I wouldn't let Keith use me again. I would help him, but on my terms. And if he wasn't willing to accept that help, then he'd have to find another way out of the situation he'd put himself in. With that firm resolve, I finally fell asleep, preparing myself for tomorrow and all that it would bring. 3 months flew by. Dinwiddie had fallen into winter, with short daylight hours, cold winds, and rare snowfalls. I watched the changing seasons from my kitchen window, noting how not only the trees and streets changed, but also my own life. A lot had changed since that conversation with Keith. We did go to see a financial advisor, Benjamin Coulson, as I had suggested. Benjamin, an older man with kind eyes and a solid character, listened carefully to Keith's story, asked some pointed questions, and suggested a plan of action. First, Keith had to recognize his addiction and seek help. That was my condition. Second, it was necessary to negotiate with the creditors for installment payments. Third, a strict budget had to be drawn up to pay off the debt as quickly as possible. I gave Keith the promised $5,000, but not for nothing. Benjamin suggested opening a special account from which the money could go only to pay off the debt. Keith reluctantly agreed to these terms. He had no choice. It was more difficult with the creditors. Keith didn't want me to be present for this conversation, but insisted that Benjamin go with him. They returned 3 hours later. Keith looked exhausted, but relieved. They agreed to the installment plan, he said then, on condition that I pay $2,000 a month and make the first installment immediately. The first $5,000 went at once. The rest Keith had to pay from his salary and any additional income he could find. Verna supported him by taking a second job on the evening shift at the local supermarket. Keith started attending a support group for people with gambling addictions in a neighboring town, another condition I had. For the first month after these events, we barely spoke to each other. Keith was busy with work and therapy, and I just gave him space. And myself too. In the second month, he called a few times. The conversations were tense, awkward. He talked about his successes in the support group, but I could hear the resentment in his voice. He still felt I should have given him all the money at once, solved his problem in one fell swoop. "You don't trust me," he said during one of those calls. I never did. "It's not about trust, Keith," I replied. "It's about responsibility. You're a grown man, and that's your problem. I'm doing what I can, but I can't solve them for you." "You help what you can?" He grinned bitterly. 5,000 of your 30? Is that what you call helping? I didn't bother to remind him that I actually had 28,000, not 30, and that 5,000 was almost a fifth of my savings. It didn't matter. Keith saw the situation his way, and no argument could change his mind. In the third month, the calls became even less frequent. Pearl asked Verna several times why they weren't visiting Grandma anymore. I knew this because I was now taking computer classes at the local library, and one of the group members, Helen, lived next door to Keith and Verna. She unwittingly became my source of information. "I saw your granddaughter yesterday," Helen said in mid-February, as we drove back from class together. "She's such a sweet girl. She asked her mom when they were coming to visit you." "And what did Verna say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Helen shrugged. Something like, "Soon, dear, soon." You know how parents usually respond when they don't want to give a specific answer. I nodded, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. I missed Pearl. She was the innocent victim in this situation, not understanding why she suddenly stopped seeing the grandmother she used to visit so often. Computer classes became an outlet for me. Twice a week, I went to the library, sat at a computer with other seniors, and learned basic skills under the guidance of Ryan, a young but patient instructor. I learned how to use email, search for information on the internet, and even created a social networking account, although I wasn't quite sure what to do with it yet. But most importantly, I met new people. Besides Helen, the group included George, a former history teacher with a sharp mind and a wry sense of humor, Eleanor, a widow like me but with a more optimistic outlook on life, and Patrick, a retiree who decided to learn how to use a computer to communicate with his grandchildren living abroad. We began to meet not only in classes. Sometimes we would gather at a local cafe after class, discussing the news and sharing life stories. George invited us to weekly screenings of classic films at the local club. Eleanor organized a book club. Gradually, I found my life filling with new colors, new people, new interests. And just when I was beginning to feel that I could move on without Keith and his family, the call from Verna came. It was a Saturday morning. I had just gotten back from the farmer's market I'd gone to with Eleanor. We had bought fresh vegetables, homemade bread, and a jar of honey from a local beekeeper. I was just setting out the groceries when the phone rang. "Nella?" Verna's voice sounded uncertain, as if she was hesitant to call at all. "It's Verna." "Hello, Verna," I answered, trying to sound neutral. "How are you?" "Fine," I paused. "Listen, Pearl misses you a lot. She keeps asking when she can see you." I felt my heart sink at the thought of my granddaughter. I miss her too, I said honestly. I was wondering, maybe I could bring her to you, just for a few hours. Keith doesn't necessarily need to know. The suggestion surprised me. You want to hide a visit to his own mother from Keith? Not exactly, Verna said quickly. It's just, he's still hurt. He thinks you betrayed him by not giving him all the money at once, and he's forbidden us to visit you. I felt anger rising up inside of me. Keith forbade his family from seeing me? Used his daughter as an instrument of punishment? Verna, I said, trying to remain calm. I'll be glad to see Pearl, but I don't want you and Keith fighting about it, and I don't want to teach Pearl that it's okay to hide things from her parents. I understand, Verna sighed, but it's a difficult situation. Keith. He's changed over the months. Therapy is helping. He's not acting out, but he's become more withdrawn, more rigid, especially when it comes to you. I've been thinking. On the one hand, I didn't want to add to the conflict with Keith. On the other hand, I really wanted to see Pearl. And maybe this visit could be the first step toward reconciliation. All right, I said at last, bring Pearl. But on one condition, you must tell Keith the truth. It doesn't have to be in advance. You can tell him afterward, but I don't want it to be a secret. Verna hesitated a moment, then agreed. All right, I'll tell him. Maybe on Sunday? It's my day off and Keith will be at his extra job all day. We agreed on tomorrow, 11 o'clock in the morning. After we talked, I sat looking out the window for a long time. I missed Pearl, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face the aftermath of Keith's drama again. The last few months had been a time of calm and new discoveries for me. I had begun to build a life where I wasn't just a mother or grandmother, but was myself, Nella Hammond, a woman with her own interests and friends. But Pearl was the innocent party in all this. She didn't have to suffer through the conflict between the adults. On Sunday, I got up early, made chocolate chip cookies, Pearl's favorite treat, and put the house in order. At precisely 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Verna stood on the threshold, holding Pearl's hand. The girl looked a little older than she had in 3 months. Her blonde hair was gathered into 2 ponytails, and she was wearing a new red coat. "Grandmother!" she exclaimed, throwing herself around my neck. "I missed you so much." I hugged her, feeling tears come to my eyes. "I missed you too, sweetheart. I really, really missed you." Verna was standing next to me, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot. "I'll pick her up at 2, okay?" she asked. "I have some things to do in town." I nodded and Verna left quickly, leaving Pearl and me alone. "I have a surprise for you," I said, leading my granddaughter into the kitchen. "Guess what I baked? Chocolate chip cookies," exclaimed Pearl when she saw the plate on the table. "My favorite!" We spent a wonderful morning together. Pearl talked about school, about her friends, about her new art teacher who praised her work. I listened, asking questions, enjoying every moment with her. After cookies and cocoa, we moved to the living room where Pearl noticed my laptop, a recent acquisition I had made after a computer course. "Grandma, you have a computer," she marveled. "Do you know how to use it?" "Of course," I answered proudly. "I even go to special lessons. Do you want me to show you what I've learned?" I opened my laptop and showed Pearl how to use email, how to search for information on the internet. She was thrilled, especially when I found an educational game appropriate for her age. "You are so smart, Grandma," she said, looking at me with admiration. "Daddy used to say that old people don't know how to use computers." I frowned slightly. "Well, your dad isn't quite right. Age doesn't prevent you from learning new things. It's just the desire that counts." Pearl nodded seriously, taking that information to heart. "Why don't you come to us anymore?" she asked suddenly. "And why don't we come to you? Dad gets angry when I ask about you." I sighed, not knowing how to explain a complicated situation to a 6-year-old. "Sometimes adults don't agree with each other," I began carefully. "It doesn't mean they don't like each other. It's just that they need time to sort out their feelings." "Like when Lizzie and I fought over the doll?" Pearl asked. "We didn't talk for a day, and then we made up." "Yeah, something like that." I smiled. "Only adults sometimes take longer to make up." "That's silly," Pearl said with childlike candor. "You should just say sorry and hug. If only it were that simple," I thought. But I didn't say it out loud. "You know what?" I said instead. Let's draw something for your dad. Maybe it'll help him be less angry. Pearl agreed enthusiastically, and we spent the next hour drawing and coloring. She drew 3 of us herself, Keith and me, holding hands in the bright sunshine. Above the drawing, in big letters, she wrote, "I love my family." Looking at that drawing, I felt a lump in my throat. For Pearl, it was simple. She loved her father, she loved her grandmother, and we were supposed to love each other. The adult world, with its complexities, resentments, and disappointments, was incomprehensible to her. At 2 o'clock, Verna came back. She looked a little nervous, but smiled when she saw Pearl proudly showing her the drawing. "It's for Daddy," the girl explained, "so he'd stop being mad at Grandma." Verna gave me an apologetic look. "It's a very pretty drawing, honey. Daddy's going to be so happy." As Pearl went to gather her things, Verna said quietly to me, "I'm sorry about that. We don't tell her Keith's mad at you, but kids can sense things like that." "It's okay," I replied. "She's a smart girl and very observant." "Just like her grandmother," Verna smiled weakly. "Listen, Nella, Keith doesn't know we're here. I'll tell him like I promised, but it might not be an easy conversation." "I understand," I nodded. "And I appreciate you bringing Pearl in spite of that. She doesn't have to suffer because of Keith and I disagreeing." Verna looked at me gratefully. "You're right. And, Keith's starting to realize it too. He's, changing, slowly but surely. The therapy's helping, and the fact that he's not acting now." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. Maybe next time we could come together," Verna suggested tentatively. "All 3 of us. I can't promise, but I'll try to convince him." "I'd be very happy to," I replied. "My door is always open to you." After they left, I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking about our conversation. Perhaps there was a chance of reconciliation with Keith, not immediately, not quickly, but gradually. And that was good, not for my sake, but for Pearl's. In the evening, I went to the weekly screening of classic movies with George, Eleanor, and the other members of our computer group. We watched Casablanca, a movie I hadn't seen in years. After the screening, we went to a coffee shop across the street, discussing the movie and sharing our impressions. "How was your meeting with your granddaughter?" Eleanor asked when we were alone at the table. I told her about Verna's plans to bring Pearl. "It was wonderful," I replied. "She's such a smart and observant girl, and she's grown so much in these 3 months." "What about your son?" Eleanor asked cautiously. "Had he made any progress?" I sighed. "Not yet, no, but maybe something will change soon. Verna says he's changing. The therapy is helping." Eleanor nodded. "Give him time. It's sometimes hard for men to admit their mistakes, especially in front of their mothers." "I know," I said, "and I'm willing to wait, but I won't let him use me or manipulate me anymore. That time has passed." "Well said." Eleanor raised her coffee cup in a playful toast. "Here's to the new Nella Hammond, a woman who knows her worth and knows how to set boundaries." I smiled and lifted my cup, tipping it to her. Returning home that evening, I thought about how my life had changed in those 3 months. The conflict with Keith, which had seemed like a disaster at first, had actually opened up new opportunities for me. I had found new friends, new interests, new confidence. Of course, the pain of Keith's betrayal was not completely gone. It still lingered in the quiet moments when I was alone with myself. But that pain no longer defined me. It was only a part of my story, not the whole story. At home, I checked my email, a new habit I'd learned in the course. Among the promotional mailings and notifications from the library was a message from Patrick inviting me to a cooking class the following Saturday. "Our group has decided to learn how to cook Italian dishes," he wrote. "Come join us. It will be fun." I smiled and replied in agreement. Another new adventure in my new life. Before I went to bed, I pulled out Earl's picture and talked to it, as usual. "You know, Earl," I said, looking at his smiling face, "I think you'd be pleased with me now. I've finally learned to stand my ground. It's just a shame I had to go to that extreme with Keith." The picture, of course, did not answer. But it seemed to me that Earl was nodding approvingly somewhere out there in the unknown where he'd gone 5 years ago. I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. I didn't know what the future would bring, whether Keith and I would reconcile, whether I would be able to trust him completely again. But I knew one thing. No matter what happened, I could handle it. Because now I had not only a responsibility to others, but a responsibility to myself. And that gave me a strength I hadn't known before. With that thought, I fell asleep, ready for a new day and all that it would bring. At 65, I finally began a new chapter of my life. And despite all the difficulties, it promised to be interesting.